right. Today what we're going to do is we're going to go through some architecture services as part of CSDM. Potentially, I'm going to propose something. I've been asked a lot of questions about governance around how to get started with CSDM and where do you introduce it into the process. So I'm going to start talking about that a little bit and kind of open it up and see what other people are doing. Then we're going to go a little bit more into exactly like a specific use case. And I got a demo set up on our demo instance that we can use. And hopefully have a good discussion around that and around the architecture's role in defining the certain parts of the CSDM. So I want to go through those things today, and then we'll open it up and talk about future topics at the end. So that's going to be it. Chime in whenever you can. We want to keep this really conversational and get to something that everybody can use. Before I start, I always like to go through this because there's a lot of new people joining us all the time, and then some people who haven't been here in a while that might just like this particular topic. So the reason we created this whole group is we want to be a leader in digital transformation. So really get that thought leadership out there and show how you use the platform to do this digital transformation. A lot of what we've been focusing time on is defining the services so that we can transform those services going forward. So wrap a model around them. And what I really like to see the model end up being eventually is a place where you have this really good modeled service. Now we can start applying concepts to it, like different AI concepts or different AI models. And I think that's what a lot of people are really thinking when they're talking about digital transformation, is applying those modern technologies like some of the AI platforms offer. So our mission is to enable all the members to be able to really participate in their own digital transformation using the ServiceNow platform. And we share work. A few weeks ago, I shared this workshop that you can do yourselves locally, or you can bring in somebody from ServiceNow to do it. There's also papers that are out there. And we used to put them on a Google Drive, but now we're putting them all on the forum. And I'll share a link to that forum that we created. It's newly created. So if you aren't registered for that, it'd be a good place to go to get these videos and papers and stuff that we're producing. This is hosted by the Enterprise Architecture Group. So in the beginning, it was me getting it started. Now there's basically a committee of us that are helping with all the content and people helping us stand the forum up and keep our YouTube channel up. So it's great that we're able to grow and get some more help and people driving content into it as well. So we try to hold these every other week. Christmas, it gets a little, we might be 3 weeks in between, or there might be some times, but we do try to hold it every other week since we started. All right. Now this is, these are the new places to go for all the content. I've been getting a lot of emails saying, okay, is there a recording of the last meeting? All our recordings now are on this YouTube playlist. So if you go here, you'll see all those listed, and everything since 2022 is on here. If you want something older, you might have to go back to the Google Drive, which is still available. There's also this community forum, and we have a dedicated forum called the Digital Services Forum. And that's where you'll get a lot of this is the next meeting, here's the recordings from the prior meetings, or else something else that somebody's working on. You could actually spin up a little forum chat on there or a little forum thread, right, to make sure that everything you're doing is captured. A lot of times we'd go between meetings and it would only be emails to communicate. Now we could jump on this forum, and if there's something we're working on together or some kind of thoughts you had around meeting or something that's coming up, you can just list them on the forum. And we're watching that.
John, I'm sorry, I should have raised my hand. I'm still getting used to Zoom. I'm a Microsoft Teams user.
Don't worry, Paul, just jump in. That's cool.
Where are all these links that we can actually click on them? Will you be sending us an email with these links in it after the meeting is done, or? Yeah,
it's on the bottom of the invite. Okay. If you go all the way to the bottom of the invite, I'm putting them on there. And okay. Then I should send out an email just letting everybody know I'm not sending out the newsletters anymore. All the content that I do is going to be posted inside of the forum.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And if somebody could paste it in the chat, that'd be great. I'm sure somebody has it handy, but just paste this YouTube link and then—
I'm on it, John.
All right. Thank you, Mitch.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Also, the events are going to be posted on there. And then we have a shared instance as well. and it's still informal. I've been meaning to make a catalog item, a public catalog item, so you can go on there and ask for permission to the instance, but it's still informal there where you have to email me and I'll create an admin login for you on that instance. But when I create you an admin login, you're an admin. So if you want to go ahead and create a login for somebody else, you're able to do that as well. So I have about 100 admins on this instance right now. And that's the instance I'm going to demo from today. So if there's something you like that you see in the demo today, you can go jump back there and get that content to get started. All right. Any first timers on today? If you could post who you are and where you're from and what you're here for, just post it in the chat. That'd be great. We go back and look at that chat and make sure if you have any questions or about the group or the communities that you can get to me. So if you just post your name and like I said, name, company, and what you're here for, that'd be great. We'd love to get new members. And we seem to be getting every 2 weeks about 20 new members. So right now we're about 630 members that are non-ServiceNow, and then about 350 ServiceNow people that join our call as well.
Hey, John, I hate to interrupt. I think Todd Porter's waiting to be let in. I don't see where we can let him in.
Yeah, I have somebody else is waiting to be let in as well.
Okay, I just hit admit all. If there's anybody from ServiceNow that can watch that participant button and just hit the admit all, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Todd, yeah, you should be in now. I just hit the button.
Hey, John, I'm from ServiceNow, but I don't have the option to admit people.
Oh,
So
really?
you might need to make us a co-host.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can make co-host. How about now, Heather? Can you let people in? Did that work,
Yep.
Heather?
Yep, looks
Okay.
like it did.
All right, thank you. Okay, so let's jump into the content, I think. And today we're going to talk about introducing CSDM into your innovation pipeline. And this deck will be on the forum as well. So I'm going to post the deck up there. And then the video for this will be on the YouTube channel by the end of the week. So when we look at the innovation pipeline, I've worked with a couple customers and we're starting to get to these, what are the architectural requirements? Because when you think about a demand coming through, when a demand comes in for something, some new service or even a service improvement, if it's considered a strategic demand, what we usually see is the architect gets involved. So either solution architects or application architects, and they're going to be able to see, they're going to pick the application that we're going to use, make a suggestion to the development team to say, hey, we're going to use this apps based on this selection matrix that we maybe have. And then we're going to, what we want to talk about here is the part about defining the business portfolio. So how do we define the new service offerings or even the portfolios that come out of that and the data models around it, right? So this, as we go through the pipeline, before we get to the work tasks where we're actually assigning that work, we want to make sure that the architect gets eyes on that demand and is able to introduce the different pieces of a new service model that they might need. We take a look at this in a little more detail. I'm going to kind of drill down to progressive detail. When the demand comes in, right, the architect, based on certain parameters of a demand, right, a demand could turn into a change. You're not going to have architects necessarily reviewing all the change, but an architectural service, when we're looking and assessing new demand coming in, is to say, what application or applications should we use to satisfy this demand? They start to envision it in their mind, right? How does this, we don't want somebody coming in, which a lot of times they still do, saying, hey, I want to buy this app so that I can do X, right? And instead of having the architect look at it and say, we should really use this because that's the way our portfolio is set up. But also there's the business portfolio piece, right? And this is really where the CSDM comes in for those business services that we've been talking a lot about. So what we want to talk about is this part of an architectural service where the architect team, solution architects, app architects, enterprise architects are participating in that demand evaluation. So I want to introduce a process here today, and I'm going to kind of bounce it off everybody and see what everybody else is doing, because this is just conceptual for now. All right. Now, if we look at IT for IT, this is IT for IT that's coming, this is more the architect's participation in this evaluation stage, right? You're evaluating a new digital service or digital product, right? A new idea that's coming in. So before it hits the portfolio, you're in that stage where it's just something proposed now. It's a new idea that they decided should turn into a demand. It warranted some additional evaluation. So it turns into a demand, so they're evaluating it. Right, so that's kind of the stage we're looking at. Now, one of the states I really like is, I stole this from one of the documents, the architectural documents from the state of Maryland. They have this published publicly, and a lot of people, they publish their architectural methods, but this is what they use. So they're going to identify the technology requirements, right? So this is what the architect does, the solution architect. And then they're going to submit a solution request. So this is actually a little backwards, right? So what they're saying here is that the demand manager, right, should be able to submit, somebody should be able to submit a requirements document, like I need a new app or I need a new service, and then submit it to the architectural team. What I'm proposing is that as the demand starts everything, and then we automate, right, that piece where we're sending a request to the architecture team to submit something, or, you know, to suggest an application. And so then the solution architect is assigned, and they become part of that demand evaluation process. And then it goes down, right, to where they actually go ahead and promote it into development, right? It's up for consideration like everything else does in the demand pipeline. It's not just done because they say, oh, we got an app and, you know, we have a good idea, right? Now it has to go through the financial gateway and all the approvers for the stakeholders. So this is what the piece I want to talk about today, or I showed you just two references to where it's described better than what I'm going to describe it today, because I'm going to introduce like a lightweight entry into this instead of all the IT for IT pieces, which is pretty elaborate because they go from IT for IT, and then they show you in TOGAF what the architecture role is. So I'm loosely connecting to these different methods that they have defined. All right, so let's jump into the demo and show you a little bit more about what I'm talking about. Now, like I said, I'm going to give you this PowerPoint because part of a deliverable could be a PowerPoint. And if you need this PowerPoint and you can use it to describe it to your organization, I want you to be able to do that. Whether you're going on to the environment and you're comfortable enough to do the demo I'm going to do for you, or if you just need a click-through demo. So this part is actually talking about the records in that process. So a new demand comes in, you can click on it, and this is what a demand looks like. So here we're saying issue uniforms to new employees, and then there's certain things that need to be done in order to assess this demand better. Right? So at this point, we just have a draft of a demand that came in, and at this point, the BRM decides it's a strategic investment. So they actually label it to be strategic, and then they could pick the type of strategic investment it is, whether they think it's going to be an epic or a project. In this case, we're going to say we usually flow into epics for these new types of ideas that are coming in.
John, can we ask a question about that category, strategic?
Sure.
The question is, and I put it in the chat, if you open up that drop down, what does ServiceNow have as the other options for the categories as where they see strategic versus operational standard work, meaning strategic being a project, it's CapEx, or if it's not that, it's upper OpEx, and it's more like like you said earlier, make a change or make an enhancement or something like that.
I'll show you that in the demo. So I'll pull it down for you in the demo, and we can talk about that real quick.
Cool, thanks.
You're welcome. All right, so after it's submitted, this is the part where I introduce process now, because we don't want the BRM that's been assigned. We don't want that BRM to now say, hey, I'm going to create it. I'm going to go to a PDF document, like they're saying in the state of Maryland, and I'm going to submit a request to the architecture team to evaluate this and say, what application do I use, or how does it affect my portfolio? So what we want to do here is we want to introduce a little bit of workflow. Right? We want to say when the demand is submitted, And I'll show you this workflow in the demo, but when it's submitted, we want to create tasks for the architect. An example of one of the tasks might be that we want to do an application assessment or assess the application portfolio and determine what recommendation you're making to the development team, or assess the business portfolio and then determine how this new demand is going to affect that business portfolio. Okay, so that's the workflow. And I'm going to show you it, like I said, in the demo. We'll talk about it a little more. But when that kicks off and it creates those tasks, an architect, whoever's assigned to evaluate the tasks, can come in and either look at the group tasks, because I assigned this to the architect group. So there might be these assessed demands against app portfolio or the business portfolio, right? These are the types of demands that might come in. And I just did it for proof of concept, but there could be checklists on these. There could be all kinds of things you do to make these tasks more elaborate inside the workflow. I could add different things to it. But for now, it's just a task that says, go ahead and do this work. And here's the demand that the BRM, here's the detail the BRM filled out on the demand so far. So they can pull that out of their queue, whatever you're using, in this case, the timesheet portal, and start working on it. Okay, and then from there, once they get that demand, they might say, oh, I need to make changes. So now do they go in as the architect into production right away? And do they add the get uniforms for employee? Do they add that as a pipeline right into production? Or maybe there's a little more governance around it and they say, okay, we have to put in a user story to let the development team know that they should install this. But there's a problem with that, right? Because you don't want to make the first time a user sees a new, like a solution owner or a stakeholder, you don't want to make it so the first time they see a new offering is when it goes live. You want them to see the offering when it's in the planning stage, because in DPM, you can give solution owners and stakeholders visibility all the way in that plan phase. So we want to give them visibility, like I said, before it hits production. Usually you think of CSDM is when it hits production, I'm bringing the model with me. But you can have these in different phases, right? In pipeline, because that's where it is right now, right? It's just a demand and it's in the pipeline to be evaluated, because we're actually doing work on this, even though it's just a demand that may never get done, it's still a pipeline offering.
Hey, John, another point of clarification.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of constraints with regards to the phases. There's as you're showing, pipeline, catalog, and retired, and that's it. And the business service has to be in the operational status and in the catalog phase before any of the so-called offerings under it could be moved to the catalog and operational phase. Isn't that correct?
Well, in DPM, you can still see it.
You'd see it, but you can't move it to catalog. You
Right.
can't move the child to catalog unless the parent is in catalog.
Right, and that's another part I'm going to talk about here in a minute.
Okay.
Is when we get in the demo, what we should do is we could put that in pipeline so there's visibility to the solution owners and to the other stakeholders in the business. But there should also be user stories submitted to the development team to say, look, when you move this to production, you have to move this to catalog, right? So we could actually document those stories as part of the demand process, because we're an architect giving instructions to the development team, or we're an architect saying during the development phase, call me for this user story or assign this user story to me so I could make these changes, right? Because the architect is participating in the model. We're not going to give these requirements to a bunch of developers to define all these pieces, because they might not know the business portfolio very well.
Yeah, and for a discussion for later, what I found happened was a lot of our in development apps are interactable. In other words, they are developing them that they need to submit tickets or report issues during the development. So they're in the pipeline, but really in order for them to be interactive with incident problem change, we had to move them to the catalog, even though their status is in development.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, those phases are they get a little tricky sometimes. Yeah, as you filled me in a few times with. All right, so the next part, the architect is working on those tasks, but as part of the demand process, this is kind of what you were getting into, Lou. The architect may also want to pass some stories down to the epic that hasn't been defined yet. Like we know this is going to be a strategic investment, and we determine it's going to be an epic. It could be a project like you mentioned before, but we may want to attach some stories to the demand so that we're sure that we're kicking off that project or that epic with some stories underneath it. So the epic hasn't been created yet, so we can't add it to the epic because we're still in the demand evaluation process. But this is kind of like a predetermined story for that epic. And I'll show you what I created here, another workflow to actually move these stories over to the epic once it goes live. So that this way you have visibility to the demand, and then when the demand goes to approved and it creates the epic, the stories are created and visibility goes all the way back to that business stakeholder. So they could actually see the epics and stories and get updates on those. Like I said, I'll show you what that looks like. Now, in the end, what we want to do, right, even though this is all just a demand, we are putting an offering in the table. And what I'm suggesting is we're putting an offering in the table during the demand phase. And then we should be able to go back in DPM and actually give visibility, even though there's not going to be much here, right? There might be a team defined. There's a demand in the queue. We know that. So we create the new service and then actually label that demand with the service. Okay, so all those things can happen during this phase. So if we look at the overall piece, right, you have a BRM or a business analyst, a lot of people call them, and then they're working with the architect to do the demand evaluation. And we introduced a new piece in that demand evaluation, which is adding the data model parts, the common service data model pieces in there. Right, so they're adding the pieces in there. The architect's doing this work. The architect may give some instructions to the development team. And then we're going back to the solution owner, usually somebody that's on the demand record that is actually suggesting this change. And we're giving them visibility to what's going on right now. Any questions on that? We're going to do a demo of this live, but I wanted to walk you through this. And then a lot of people, like I said, aren't going to want to go do the whole demo. So you might just click through the deck and explain that, hey, this is a getting started on governance.
Hey, John, this is Sufyan. One question: when you made the comment in the third screen that, when the architect and the BRM, they will work together to put in the CSDM components. What does that mean?
Well, what it's doing here is, so the application selection is pretty typical. I'm not going to go into that. That's usually what an architect does, right? Is it says, how are we going to build this thing? But what I'm suggesting here is that we're going to add another task that's assessing the business portfolio. And that's where we want to introduce a new offering into the business portfolio. That's the CSDM component, the service offering that somebody could see on the business side.
And they will see it as a part of a capability, or I'm just trying to understand, what would it attach to in CSDM? This request, this demand, will it attach? Because they usually see the business applications and capabilities. Will it somehow associate that this new change is related to this business application or this capability?
So what they would see at this point, and that's a good question, because that's where I'm going to go next with this. The part that we're defining now, just to give visibility in this use case, is just going to be the stuff in the green, right? So we're not connecting anything yet to an application service because we're not sure the apps we're going to use. So there's no traceability back to a capability that we're defining yet. We're just defining maybe the service, maybe the offering, just this part we're defining.
The consume side, okay.
Yeah, during the demand phase. So in this use case that I'm going to demo today, it's just the business service offering, but it could be the business service as well. Because these are the part that you're going to give visibility to the business. You're not going to let them really see this stuff, right?
Agreed.
Okay. All right, so let's jump in and.
I'm sorry, I have a question. Back when you were talking about either it's a project or it's agile, do you have a way to do a hybrid? I've done this before where we kind of made our own little hybrid so we could run projects and then create epics within the projects. I didn't know if that was part of the type, because you have epic or project.
Yeah, you could do it. You could do a hybrid. So the way that our hybrid works is that you have a project phase in a waterfall project, and you can determine that as an agile phase. And then what you're doing is you're submitting sprints into that phase.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that before. I've used it like that before. I didn't know if that was still a capability of this. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're actually managing the project, that is in there. All right, so let's go back here to all my demands first, because I thought I was going to be able to change that one, and I'm not. I want to use that one for the demo. But in the new demand process, just to cover that, what Lou asked, there's strategic, and then there's operational. So in the operational phase, the defaults are change defect. I don't know what that is, no conversion. I think that's one I put in, so you can probably ignore that one. But those are the operational ones. And then on the strategic side, these are the ones that we have out of the box. Is anybody using SAFE? I know a couple of the states were talking about using SAFE, but I don't know if anybody's using it today.
I used it at State Farm a lot. They were a safe house, but not an MUSC, no.
Okay. I think Montana was using it. I don't know if they're using these actual SAFE objects, but the SAFE epic is a little bit different than the regular Agile 2.0 epic that I'm going to use today.
John, I had a question about the drop down again. It's interesting that enhancement is under strategic. Of course, every organization is going to handle things differently, regardless of what ServiceNow suggests, but assuming ServiceNow has vetted this with a lot of feedback from all their different customers. However, operationally, the enhancement, is that there because it's really tied more specifically to a project that may have a story, and then you're enhancing that story? Is that why?
Yeah, so usually that's something in flight. That's kind of like something that or a product, you have a digital product that is being worked on, and you're not going to create a new one. So you're just going to enhance that thing that's already there. So that's another type of record that you could submit.
Got it. Thanks.
You're welcome. All right, so let's go back to the, I thought I was going to be able to change the one there. Let's go back to the demand that I'm going to talk about today. And it's going to be somebody said, I want to digitize the process for getting new uniforms. Basically, it's a paper today, and they want to say, I want to make sure that I can electronically submit the request like I do to get parking, or like I do to get somebody's W-2, or like I do to get Active Directory as part of the onboarding process. I want to be able to get this person uniforms so that they don't have to come in their first day and I hand them a sheet and say, here's how you go get your uniforms. So that's the scenario that I'm painting here. Now, the first part that we talked about is this is in draft. I'm a BRM that's evaluating this. And then at some point after I go ahead and I do all my business case, I do my financials, right? There's different assessments you can do on here. Whatever your process is, the part of the process we want to talk about specifically is once all that's done from the BRM side, that initial piece, they want to go ahead and say, it is going to be strategic. It's going to be an epic. We're going to submit the demand. So it's going to move the submitted phase. And then the submitted phase is where we kick off our workflow. Okay, so and what the workflow should do in the submitted phase is it should create those tasks automatically for the architect, right? So I don't want to go out anymore and fill out things. So what I should do is I should create demand tasks down here for the architect to provide that service on the innovation pipeline, right? And the service, again, is to assess the application portfolio and the business portfolio. So I didn't kick those off here. So our workflow didn't kick off. And the reason it didn't kick off is because I didn't enable it in our environment yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this and we're going to test it instead. Because I'll show you a couple of the features of the workflow so that you guys, as you're messing around with it, you can try it too. So it's digitized the process for getting uniforms. And here, this is where we create the tasks. So what I'm doing in this task is I'm saying when the demand is updated and it moves to a state of submitted, like we just moved ours to submitted, go ahead and create a task. And we want to, when we create this task, we want to say, assess the demand against our app portfolio. And then we want to give it to the architect group. I'm not going to assign it to a specific architect. I just want to get it into their queue right now. And then I'm going to have another task. And that other task, and it might be the same architect, it might not be, right? Assess the demand against the business portfolio. So basically what we're doing is going back to that piece that we had in the PowerPoint, right? Where we're going up to those services that we defined here. So these are the two tasks. The demand comes in, it goes to submitted, bang, we shoot these two requests off to the architect group.
But that presumes you, in that demand record, there were the requirements related lists, that presumes you already have that, as you said earlier. So that the architect can review those requirements and understand, you know, from a portfolio perspective before they do that further examination, what really, okay.
Yeah, that's the assumption, is that BRM has defined it enough, because what's going to happen here, they're going to push it to the architect, but also they're going to push it to the stakeholders. And we want the architect's assessment be visible to the stakeholders that are saying, are we putting the money up for this thing, right? So when it's submitted now, they're saying, I have enough information in here in my business case for an architect to look at it and make a good enough assessment. Or likely they're going to have some conversations, right, based on the task.
Hey, John, another question now, this is Sufyan. While you showed us the technical, due diligence that we care for, does it also balance the other due diligence, like the finance and business justification and all?
It could. In this demo, no. In this demo, we're just talking about those specific pieces.
Okay, thank you.
But the next piece of that is exactly that. The next piece of this, after we do this, would be to go ahead and drop it into a demand pipeline so that it's evaluated for investment. So that's where usually it's coming in to where the architect might do a ROM. Sometimes in the process, the architect has to do that. How much is it going to cost to build, right?
Yes.
And then it gets down here, and then the stakeholders can say, wow, it's going to be huge, or it's going to be really quick. And they can make their decision to push it through to the developers.
And you're saying those capabilities exist right now, is it right?
Yeah. If you have SPM, that's part of the product.
Ah, okay, thanks.
Yeah. Investment funding is the specific capability that does that. I'm not going to talk about that today, but I think I might have done that in a prior meeting. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to run the flow that we proposed in that part where we're defining these tasks. So I'm going to run this little test against that record that we created, that demand record. And then what happens with Flow Designer as you build these things out, take the opportunity to show a little bit about the capability here, is you can run it and then it's going to give you that trace file. So what you could see in the trace file was the actual task run, because sometimes it had that demand that I piped in, it has to meet the criteria first. So what it's doing is it's saying, yes, it did meet the criteria because it is in the submitted state. And then it went ahead and created tasks for the architect, right? So it created, and it gives you the task number. So that's the trace file when you're doing your testing, or if you want to change your process around, you want to add another task in here to say, go ahead and do a ROM for me, right? So I can put a cost onto into the demand so that they can consider that cost, whether it's small, medium, or large. Maybe you use t-shirt size is usually what people use in the demand phase. But if you wanted to do that, right, you can do that and then test it in here. So if we go back to our demand record, after that workflow ran, which should be automated, right? I just left it. I left the demand right now. I didn't activate it, and that's so once I activate it, that would automatically happen. But for the demo today, I wanted to leave it not activated so that I can run it manually. So now what we'll see is there's demand tasks, assess the demand against the app portfolio and make a recommendation, and assess the demand against the business portfolio, make a recommendation. And these demand tasks that we created, like you saw in the workflow, we created those to go to the architect assignment group. And that may be different for you guys too. I understand that, hey, if you're going to this one business unit or this one agency or this one department, there might be different architect groups. So there may be some logic in front of that where there's different queues depending on who's doing the evaluation. The assumption here too is that all these things are running through an architect group, which a lot of times isn't the case. But assuming all that stuff, right, we want to give those tasks to the architect. Now what the architect does, so now the BRM's done, they submitted it. The architect now has to come in and do some work. So they can go into their timesheet portal. And if the architect team said, hey, this is likely going to be a Workday request, so I'm going to give it to this person that knows Workday really well, a solution architect that knows Workday, or it's ServiceNow. What they'll be able to do is go in and get the task themselves if it was assigned to them, just like any other tasks. Or on the timesheet portal, they'd be able to come down and they'd be able to see their demand tasks. So right now there's 2 demand tasks that we just submitted. And now I can come in and I can say, assess this against my business portfolio and make a recommendation. Right. So at this point, the architect now has to have some conceptual idea of what's going on in the portfolio itself. Right. So they have to know where this fits. So if I'm an architect, I'm looking at this thing and I'm saying, okay, I'm able to go back to the demand. And I'm looking at the demand and I might be saying, okay, this is probably going to be an onboarding activity. Let's go back to the demand on this one. This is going to be an onboarding activity. And I might have to go back here. Right, because they're saying they want to be able to get these uniforms as part of the onboarding process. So I know as an architect, I already have an idea. So I'm going to go look at what we're doing for onboarding and see if we have something there. Right. So what they're going to have to do is come in and go to the service builder, right? Because this is one of the ways you might go in. Like Lou, I know you guys are using Inspy a lot, but if you're coming in and you're looking at your business portfolio, you can look at Service Builder, right? Service Builder is the new interface that we're using. And I can say, okay, I want that to land in onboard new employee. And then in onboard new employee that's published right now. So I'm going to take it out for draft and I'm going to do some work on it. And so one of the things I might want to do is go ahead and say, manage the offering. And this is where I would come in and I would say, I want to submit a pipeline offering underneath onboarding. That's saying, get new uniforms, right? So this is where they can come in and say, let me create a new offering here. And then I want to get my uniforms. And then we're actually putting this in the portfolio so that the business can see it, right? This is my holder. So get new uniforms for employee. Then we're going to save and close that. So here, this is where you start defining your team, right? All the stuff. Who's going to be the ones that's getting the requests for new portfolios, the financials, if there's things around that, right? All those can come in here. If we're charging back, that's where your financials would come in. But right now, just for this, because we're focusing on the architect, I'm just going to put that get new uniforms in there. And then we're going to go ahead and now that we can do a couple things because the offering is created now. And I'll show you what we can do. So I'm going to go back now and take this out of draft mode. And I'm going to say, let's go ahead and save our business service, right? So now what we did is we added a new offering to our service so that we can do a few things. Now, one of the things I could do, because I have that, is I can now say, right, I could add this, get new uniforms for employee. I can add this to my demand. Because I know that's the new service that I'm working on creating. Okay. And then what I could also do is I might say, okay, I just did that as a demand task and I added it in and I associated it to the demand. Now what I want to do is I might want to say that on a story, I might want to define a new story. And the story might be that, hey, I just created this thing that's hanging there. I didn't do any of the common service data model work to attach this to an Epic or to attach it to an application service or application services. Maybe you need Workday and maybe you need some kind of uniform app. You need an API, like a microservice, maybe that's an application service you need to attach to make this story happen. So here, what we want to do, we might want to say, create CSDM parts for the new uniform service, right? So this is basically a story that's getting passed back to the epic that we're going to create, providing the demand goes through. And so now they're attaching a story and adding that story to the demand. I want to show you. Yeah.
Sorry, I had a question real quick. Whenever you do a service offering, does that attach to a maintained catalog item?
No, not by default. You have to attach it.
Okay, so there is a way to link those two pieces together. So that way I know my service offering goes to a specific catalog item.
Yeah, as part of defining it here, we could have defined the catalog item as well. But that's probably going to be, make sure you define the catalog item. I don't know if I'd have to say that in the demand because that's kind of an assumption because we need a UI to digitize the thing.
Yeah, I was just wondering, trying to keep the service offering and the catalog item one for one, because that's going to be tricky.
Well, it might not be one-to-one. Like Lou, I know you have one service offering that has about 30 catalog items on it, right?
That's right. If you look at, for example, if your business services, computing services, for example, and then within that you have laptop services, you have laptop services and desktop services and things like that. Well, the specific laptops might be the particular model of that laptop. So that's your catalog item. And all you have to do is go to whatever service offering that it goes with. And in the related list of at the bottom of the service offering, there's a available for subscribers related list, and you just link it there. In the San Diego release, they made it a lot easier to do that.
Oh,
In the service builder, you can actually hook it where I defined the service. There's a place to hook the catalog item.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And that's the part here where you got to get like a lot of the mechanics. I'll show you a little bit of that right here. But when we're using creating the demand, and then we go, so let's go to the epic. Let's go ahead and say now we're going to go ahead and I think I already have the epic defined for this, but let's jump into the epic a little bit. So one of the things I want to do when I create the epic is I want to be able to attach these stories. I want to roll them over to the epic, and that's not out of the box. So what I did in Flow Designer is I created another one, and it's really simple. It says when an epic is submitted, if on the epic, there's a demand field. So you can see where the epic came from. So I can go back to the demand. So all this is saying is if the epic, when it's created, if there's a demand attached to it, automatically go down and then get all the stories, right, all the stories that were attached to that demand. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to update those by now putting an epic on the story. Right, so we're taking the newly created epic, which triggered this workflow, and now we're attaching it to all those user stories that were on the demand. So basically what happens is when I go ahead and create the epic, which will be, right, because this is epic up here, there'll be a create epic link on here. And then what the epic would do is, and I already created on this one, so I can't go back. That's the part of my demo I messed up. I should have waited to submit this one to create the epic, but let me just jump over to the epic and show you that part. So when we go to the epic that was created, and again, there's agile development epics and there's scaled agile epics. So in this one, I'm using the agile development epics. Okay, so this record that comes through here, it's going to be, it's creating this off the demand, and my workflows are pushing those user story records over here. So when the epic gets created, it's going to push that story that we created into the epic child. So now the last step of the demo, and I want to get here, is now that we've done this work, right? The user evaluated it, and the architect did the evaluation. The last step that I wanted to show here is this work is done, the evaluation's done. Now when this demand is able to be assessed with all that architectural assessment attached to it, but also you can go back to the business and you could show them that, hey, there's a get new uniforms in the pipeline, in the portfolio. And and you can see the demand, right? You give visibility to the business to that demand, so they're not emailing and calling you anymore. You can actually show them where that demand is. And then if they get to the demand, they can see the architectural work that was done against the demand. Right? So the idea here is that we don't want these people who have to go into some custom dashboard, but they come back and they go to where they're used to see all their services, and they're able to see that demand. So if we go back into the demo here and go to workspaces, we go to digital portfolio management. It'll bring up our portfolio. Now, the one thing you could do is you can define a personal portfolio, and you could put that one, get new uniforms in there if there's somebody in charge of that process. But you can also show them in the enterprise portfolio where this landed. Now, we attach this one to onboarding, right? So here, just in the demand phase, we'll be able to go in and, it's in this portfolio. We'll be able to go in and look at human resources and see onboard new employee. This is the get new uniforms for employee that we just created, right? So in there now, because we attach that to the demand, they're able to go ahead and see this record and see that we're in the planning phase, and that demand we just created for get new uniforms is attached. And then our epic, right, would be in the build phase. You'd be able to see your epic, because now we're building that, we're doing build work instead of just planning work. And then when it hits production, right, they'll get all the additional information in production because you already defined that. So that's kind of a little bit about your design phase. And then we fast forwarded it all the way down. So the last part I showed you here is we skipped a couple places, right? So we went from here. Jump back up real quick. So we went from the top part, right? We went from here where we're assessing all the way down to here where we're showing them that digital portfolio or that digital product or service. We're showing them that in the portfolio. That was that last screen. But there's work to be done in the middle, right? And that's the last piece. I'll just bring it up. I don't have time to go through all that, but there's work to be done in the middle that we want to consider as well. And what I mean by that is we've done this evaluate part. We introduced some new parts, and we brought the CSDM in very early on, right? Which is really important, because that's where you want it considered in your strategy phase. What is this? How is this thing affecting my overall portfolio? So we don't end up with a bunch of, like a shanty town for these apps, but we're actually building an enterprise, right? And that's where you actually have to address it, I think, is way up front. Or if a new service is coming in for improvement, you might say, look, we want to reevaluate that portfolio, make sure it's in the right spot. Can we add it to other areas of the catalog maybe? Right, so all those things should come in during that evaluate phase during all strategic investments. And that's basically what I'm proposing here. All right, I've got a few minutes left, so I want to push through this and continuing this discussion. This is where a lot of people are getting hung up. And I had a couple conversations about this over the last 2 weeks, is what does everybody do differently now that we're adopting the CSDM? We can't just have one person going in there saying, what's all this stuff we got out there? And then let's move it into a model and get everybody to start using the model, right? We have to actually introduce it into our governance. So I think the next part we need to consider is what happens when that thing gets approved. It makes it through the investment phase, and now it lands in a queue for a product team to work on. It's their epic. It lands in their queue. So now we have to say, okay, what is their role? The developers and the release managers, what is their role in defining those CSDM components? So a lot of times it should be communication back or assignment within that Scrum that's running the epic. It should be communication back to the architect to say, hey, dude, we need to connect this thing, or like Lou said, we need to move it from pipeline into catalog. And like you mentioned earlier, we need to connect it to the catalog item, right? Like all those things should be defined as part of those user stories or a story task. So this is a big section. I didn't cover this today, but that's kind of the next thing in the evolution of where the CSDM comes in. Is there anybody else who's working on this governance piece? Because I haven't found anybody yet, but with all the people in the group, I figured I'd ask. Is there anybody else there yet?
Hey, John, this is Todd from BJC. We're kicking the tires trying to figure it out. So we've got a black belt working on the team, trying to define the processes and how do we capture it as early as possible? What's the stage gate before you release something into production or operations to make sure that all the checks and balances have been solved for? And so that's where we're at.
Good deal. If,
John,
if sharing some point would be great if you could.
John, I think it's important to note that the business services, the service offerings, the catalog items, they're all stemming from the underlying items in the CMDB, where the model is there, the asset is on the model, the CI is on the asset, the model has the life cycle information, and then the catalog item is published from the model, which then connects to your offering all the way up the stack to your portfolio. So governance is in layers, meaning when you have the CMDB and you have all these objects, the models and the assets and the CIs, all of those have fields on the form, which then also going to have data owners and data stewards. We know that in CSDM, the product owner is vital, right? Every single model that's associated with an application service, right? That is the business app is consuming and that the service offering is depending on must have a product owner, right? For accountability. And that's all part of your governance too.
And then the product would probably be, like in this case, it would be onboarding, right? Would be the product. And then the get new uniforms would be like a new feature of that product, right?
If you were to use a service model in ServiceNow and it doesn't come out of the box, but customize it so you can publish the product, right? If you were selling that, customers consuming it, you could publish it from that service model. And then, yeah, that would all be in place and connected.
So that's what Mark was on a few meetings ago talking about, is where does that digital product come in? And I think like this type of governance is setting us all up for that. So we should definitely bring the product in at some point. I don't think a lot of people are there yet with products, but like you said, we might not be able to get around it for that catalog item piece. We need that product model in there. And that product model should also be what you're building, right? So it should be that Epic lands in that group that's running the scrums on that product. So.
And we could have multiple epics with that product, or is it now phases? Because I know there's phases, epics, stories, enhancements, how it rolls down.
Yeah, if you're doing the hybrid, it would be a mixture. If you're doing, straight agile, it'd probably just be the epic attached to the product, right?
Right.
Or multiple epics, sure.
Yeah, based on what you're doing.
Right, because the enhancement, the story, the epic, they all link or associate with the product models table, which would include whether you're doing a software model, hardware model, service model, application model, right? You decide. Homegrown apps may use an application model because you're dictating the life cycle of that because you built it, versus a software model, which is COTS out of the box and comes with the life cycle if you're using things like SAM Pro and ServiceNow's content management library system. Same thing with Ham Pro for the hardware life cycles.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm going to put this, like I said, the video, I'll put everything in the forum. And if you have any more things on this, or you have anything to share with the group, you want to bounce your governance off how we're doing it to other people, let's drop it in there and keep the conversation going on that if there's any guidance around it. And, what I provided today was nowhere near, being able to be written up into a white paper on governance for the CSDM during an innovation pipeline. But I just wanted to get the conversation started. So that things like the product definitely would be a great piece to talk about, but more of the roles too. What does an architect do to start participating in this? And how do we get the architect team ready to receive it and provide the service of business portfolio evaluation during the demand phase. All right, so the demo mostly worked. I just screwed up my Epic piece, but hopefully you guys can use the click through, and that'll assist you some in having this conversation in your own organizations. And I'll go back on the chat and see if I missed anything as well. But I want to just spend the last 5 minutes on agenda planning. For those of you that weren't on the call this week, we do have a steering committee now. So Charles, Rod, Rachel, Jason, and I are all part of that. And we're going to take turns leading the different sessions. So you have a mix of people with a mix of experiences. Like Charles, Rachel, and Jason are focused on enterprise, very large accounts. So there may be some that are more mature. And then I work mostly on state and local government accounts is really my focus. But this way we can get a mix of industry experience. So hopefully we get some stuff from financials and manufacturing. Those are a couple of the big ones. Then in the next few meetings, what Jason's going to do is he's going to kind of continue. We're a little bit on a theme about the CSDM delivery. Like, how do we introduce it into that? So what Jason's going to come and talk about is something that he presented to a lot of his customers on how you set up the platform operating model. So who are the people you need to add to the team, or what are the roles definitions that you need to have to actually make all this stuff work? What Charles is going to talk about is a multi-tier one. So I have this service desk in the United States that's using ServiceNow to provide service to all the people in the United States. Now I have one in Japan that pops up. I have another tier one service desk over here, and they want to share the platform. We talked about this a little while ago, like incident management. I brought it up a while ago, but I didn't follow through on it. So it's kind of the same thing. We keep running into those scenarios. Is like, what's the best way to divide up that the people in Japan get service in the Japan help desk, and the people from US get the service from the US help desk. But if the person from the US goes to Japan, we might want to, put their service center over in Japan, right? And the common service data model accommodates those things. So Charles is going to talk a little bit about that. And then Rachel, a couple weeks from now, she has a few ideas that she's still kicking around. So next meeting, we'll talk about what Rachel's going to do. So if any of these things are things you want to participate in, we can really use a voice like Lou. You guys jumping in today is super valuable. But if you want to coordinate with Jason or Charles or Rachel, please just reach out to them and let them know. And it's really good to have you guys chiming in and make sure we're doing something relevant here. And then also sharing time. It'd be great if we had half of where I was speaking and then half of where somebody else, like Todd, I wish I had your name before I did this presentation. I would have, it would have been great for you to take half of it and come in and say what we're actually doing versus this concept John's presenting.
It might have been a little underwhelming.
That's all right. We don't care on this. We don't want to hear everything polished here, right? That's the beauty of this group. Is a lot of times we come in and the demos break, right? We want to take stuff that's rough here and get ideas from everybody. That's the goal of the forum. So if you're just kicking stuff around or you're stuck somewhere, those are even more fun than, hey, there's this beautiful polished thing that works, like, right? So don't feel bad if it's just something like that, because typically it's going to hit a bunch of people in the right spot, right? They're going through the same stuff.
Thanks for doing this, John. It's always helpful. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Anybody else have anything? Are we right at time? We got a minute left. If anybody else has any questions or want to bring up any topics that we want to introduce. All right, it looks like not this time around. Thanks everybody for those of you that chimed in and gave me the feedback. I really appreciate that. And we'll talk to you in a few weeks and hear what Jason has to say.
Hey, John, one last thing. Sorry. It looks like several folks are trying to figure out how to reach out to you and team. Is there a best way to do that?
The forum is going to be the best way.
Okay.
So if you go into communities and look up Digital Services Forum, or go into the invite, and at the bottom of that, there's a Digital Services Forum link on there. You could subscribe to that forum and you'll get all the messages from it. Or you could just go in there and see the threads without logging in or anything. But it'd be great if you could subscribe. We want to try to get more subscribers on there so we can have these conversations without waiting 2 weeks in between. And if you don't see that, you could just send Chris, have him send me an email, but you should see that forum link in there. It was also in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, everybody, see you in a few weeks. Thank you.